So before we start, I'll just state for the record that my name is Ben Bauman. I'm here in Muncie, Indiana at the home of Mr. Van Smith, who I'll be interviewing today, and today's date is January 30th, 2020. All right, so to get started, if you could just tell me about when and where you were born.
Ben, I was born in Oneida, New York, right the exact geographic center of the state of New York.
Wow, okay. Interesting. And what were your parents' names?
My parents were Paul Smith and his wife Rita Smith.
Okay. And were your parents originally from New York as well, or?
My father was from Binghamton, New York, had gone to Syracuse University, graduated, came to Oneida to run the shoe store. He had joined a shoe manufacturing company and was sent to Oneida to manage the shoe store. And my mother went to high school in Oneida and then went to work for the Oneida community, the big employer in town. She was had an administrative job, met the shoe store manager, and
wow,
that was the merge.
Oh, okay, wow, interesting.
Quite soon after that, I was born soon after they married,
right.
A year or so after they were married, and my dad died just before I was 2 years old.
Okay, wow.
So the household became my grandmother, who worked in the casket factory in Oneida,
wow,
sewing linings, became the homemaker. My mother continued her job, and I was the kid at home for both of them to take care of. So we grew up in that sense.
Sure. Okay. Very interesting. And where did your family hail from before New York?
They were all really New York folks.
Okay.
My
Sure.
dad's parents came from Watertown, New York.
Okay.
And my dad was an only child. His father and mother lived in Watertown, where his dad ran a glove manufacturing company.
Sure.
They had just the one child, my dad. And the fortunate thing in all the misfortunes of early deaths, my grandfather and grandmother passed away and owned their own home, which, when everything was settled, left about $10,000 in trust for their one grandchild.
Wow, okay.
Me.
Yeah.
And my mother had earlier in life had dated a lawyer in Oneida, so that lawyer became my trustee.
Okay.
And that was that $10,000 became the vehicle for me later to go to Colgate University, which is just down the road from Oneida.
Great.
And total cost in those days was about $10,000. So my
Perfect.
4 years of Colgate came from my grandfather's house. And
wow.
that was
Interesting, okay.
the story.
Yeah, very cool. And how did you get to Indiana?
My mother remarried later in life to a gentleman who I had known for many, many years and had been one of those great guys I would go to. He and his wife were always sort of semi part of the family. And he would write the applications for me, and he encouraged me to go to Colgate. And so I'm not a college guy himself, but he played golf with the trustee at Colgate, and that's how I happened to go there. But he lost his wife, and in 1948, in the middle of the examination week at the end of my sophomore year in Colgate, they were married, and they came to Colgate, and they got married, came and had their reception there in the middle of exam week, I remember.
Wow.
And we were all close friends, and it was a great occasion for me to pick up a stepfather.
Sure.
That stepfather became, shortly after that, the president of the Wallace Silver Company, making flatware in Connecticut. And as time went on, he attempted to purchase that company from the family that owned it, and never could come to any conclusions about it. But he did. He was well known in the flatware business, knife, fork, spoon business. And there was a company in Muncie, Indiana called Ontario Silver. And he did make some offers to buy that from the owner. My stepfather made an offer for this Ontario company in Muncie, and while the offer to purchase didn't work, they offered him a chance to come out. They needed somebody to run it, and they wanted him to come out and run that. Told him, if you run that, spend half your time there, we'll split whatever you can make in that business with you. So he came out here half-time. The other half-time he lived in Connecticut, where he had been the head of the Wallace Company. And so they were out here. My experience took me from Colgate, and I should probably follow that up and where I matched my stepfather. I graduated from Colgate June 10th, 1950. And I had 2 job offers, each with a bank from Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
And I had I felt big because I could make a choice to which one of those I was going to take. And I was scheduled before the end of June, to make that decision. And then on the 25th day of June, 1950, Truman started the Korean War. And I knew I was 1A to be drafted. And I pictured myself digging trenches and holes and eating hard stuff. And I decided I ought to do something, so I enlisted in the Air Force. And went away to Lackland Air Force Base, as all good people going to the Air Force did. And went through training in Lackland, and all this time my father and mother were coming out and spending half-time in Muncie, Indiana, and half-time in Wallingford, Connecticut. And he was running this little plant called Ontario Silver in Muncie, Indiana.
Interesting.
I got out of, had an interesting time in the Air Force, spent the the first year or so going through basic and finally earned one stripe.
Okay, great.
And I got called down to the orderly room one day, and the master sergeant who was running the orderly room said, when I walked up to his desk, he stood up and said, "Sir, I have orders here promoting you to second lieutenant." So I said, "Thank you." I got a direct commission and tore my one stripe off that shirt and put a bar on it, and bought a bar and put it on.
Wow.
And that was the training I had, but I became a second lieutenant. And then traveled around for 2 or 3 years, got out. And when I got out of the service, I got out when the Korean War started. I was doing personnel work, and I noticed new regs were coming that said people with a 4-year commitment, which I had, could, since they wanted to downgrade the size of the Air Force, you could petition to get out after 3 years, which I did.
Yeah.
So I got out surprisingly a year earlier.
Wow.
As a first lieutenant, and decided I want to go to law school. Well, I got out it was a late spring in, that would have been 53. So I went to Yale, talked to the people, and they said, "Oh, that's great, nice transcript. Why don't you come next year, because we already have our class."
Okay.
And I was getting that story when I went around. So one of the places I stopped was in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown Law School. I was sitting in the room in the administrative area of the law school.
Right.
And this Jesuit priest came walking by and said, "Hi." And I said, "Hi, Father." And he said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I just got out of the service and I'm trying to get into law school." And he said, "Come in, sit down." Well, he had to be the dean of the law school.
Oh, wow.
Father was just great to me and said, "We can get you into law school, I think." And after he looked at the transcript. And so I said, "Great." And I began law school in the fall of 54.
Okay.
It would have been. And being a veteran, I could go to night school and day school. So in 2 years, I finished the 3 years of law school by going to day and to night school.
Wow. Okay.
Without ever diminishing my real desire to make Budweiser the most profitable company in America. I bought sufficiently beer during that period. Not work too hard, but work hard enough to finish the 3 years in 2 years.
Sure.
And in D.C., if you were a veteran, you could take the bar before you graduated from law school in your last semester if you were a veteran. So I took the bar, passed the bar, and in 24 months I had my law degree and was a member of the bar. And,
interesting.
Then I went back to, I thought, what I want to do is go out and visit my stepfather and mother who were living in Muncie, Indiana. So I came out here to visit. Thought I'd maybe take 3 weeks or something. I really wanted to, I had never become that acquainted with my stepfather, and I really liked him, and he was a good buddy. So much older than I was. So I came out, and he said, "I've got a guy downtown I want you to meet who and have lunch with." I said, "Fine." Said, "A lawyer." So I went downtown, had lunch in Muncie, Indiana, a stranger to the town, with a guy named Ray Clark, who was a lawyer in Muncie. And we talked a little bit about general stuff. And at the end, he said, I want to show you our office. And I said, fine. So we went to the office, and he had one vacant room there. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll put some furniture in here, and you can come. And he said, you can get acquainted. He and my stepfather were good friends. He said, come on out and get acquainted with your folks. You've never had a chance to get acquainted with them. And I said, oh, no. And I had told him my plan was to go to Connecticut or New York to practice.
Right.
And he said, I'm going to tell you something. Young guys right out of law school don't know they're tuck us from a hole in the ground. Mm-hmm. So why don't you just stay here 1 year, and then you can go to New York and Connecticut, and when you sit down to interview, you can say, oh, I already have, I've done a case or two, and I've written a will, and I've been to a trial, and so he said, you'll be way ahead of those guys coming right out of school.
Sure, sure.
And it sounded interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I sat down
and
went to work practicing law in Muncie, Indiana, and living with my stepfather and my mom.
Okay, wow. Interesting, yeah.
Got interested in the Muncie community, and from the standpoint of the legislature or politics, I immediately became interested in the politics. My grandmother, that was such a great part of my life, was very much a New York Irish Democrat, Republican woman. And in her casket factory, I could just in my mind picture her as that woman on top of the machine in her Irish leadership role, getting all the rest of the employees to join the union, to tell them that they didn't know anything about who they're putting down here to run this plant. And so I really came to know her. We became good friends.
So she had a lot of influence then on your political development?
I can remember my father and mother sitting at a kitchen table with her and bringing a banker in, and the banker was, and we were all having a libation, and the banker finally got serious talking politics, and he really he got more serious than any of us wanted him to, and he said to my grandmother, Agnes, he said, Aggie, I don't think you'd vote for Jesus Christ if he ran on the Republican ticket. And she slammed her glass on and she said, Jesus Christ would never run as a Republican.
Oh my gosh.
But she was a very ardent Democrat.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. That's very interesting.
So I did get interested in politics and in Muncie and in Indiana. And,
okay, very interesting. And remind me, where did you go to law school?
Georgetown. D.C.
Okay, got it. Very interesting. Let's see. What did your mother do at the time when you were growing up?
She was working as an administrative employee in I lived in Ontario, or lived in Oneida, and the big Oneida employer was Oneida Community that made knives, forks, and spoons.
Yeah, right.
She worked there.
Okay. And I guess you didn't have any siblings, correct?
No siblings.
Right. And so how would you describe your childhood overall then?
I was, because of the loss of my dad, my element, my grandmother's element in her family was limited in number. So I was, and I had lost my dad, so I was the interest of, my grandmother was one of 10 or 11,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all in or around Oneida, and they all had kids and grandkids. So the family, the good Irish family, all had interest in me as
Sure.
the kid who lost his dad and was Aggie's grandkid.
Right.
Aggie and Rita, my mom. And so it was a big, in the small town of Oneida, we had a big family, but not in our building.
Right. That sounds good. Yeah.
Knew everybody and went to high school there.
Sure. Okay. That's great. And what schools did you attend growing up?
I went to a high school in Oneida.
Okay.
And went to Colgate.
Right.
And then went in the service.
Mm-hmm.
And then went to Georgetown.
Right.
So I had a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from
Okay.
Colgate.
Interesting.
And then went on to stay active in academics.
Mm-hmm.
I have the doctorate in law from Georgetown and 5 other honorary doctorates. So I got half a dozen doctorates.
Yeah, very impressive,
And from Indiana, because while I, at my own alma mater, Colgate, I was asked later on to join the Board of Trustees, and then because I didn't have anybody else that would take it, I was chairman of the Board of Trustees at my alma mater, Colgate, for a decade. And then I was asked to join the board of Catholic University, and I served there as vice chairman for many years. And chairman was always somebody in red costume.
Yeah.
Then in Indiana, with the legislative experience, introduced me to some wonderful Indiana leaders, and Governor Whitcomb appointed me to the Higher Education Commission when it was originally formed.
Oh, wow.
And Mike Carmichael from South Bend was the chairman, and he died playing tennis.
Oh my gosh.
In the first year or two, and
Yeah.
I really became interested in what the Commission for Higher Education was doing, and became its chairman for many years. But I was on 22 years. I served on the Commission for Higher Education.
Wow.
Under 4 or 5 governors.
Oh my gosh. That's
Both
amazing.
parties.
Wow.
And so I got acquainted, and that's why I ended up with honoraries from Indiana State and Ball State and Vincennes, and then got an honorary from my alma mater.
Yeah.
But the smaller colleges had a feeling that I sort of, on the Commission for Higher Education, always tried to make sure they didn't get overrun by the by the big boys.
Sure, naturally. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And so, before you went to college, did you have any favorite subjects in school, or
Politics.
politics? Okay.
I can recall for a short time we lived in New Haven, Connecticut. Well, my mother worked there.
Oh, okay.
She and my grandmother lived there, and then we came back.
Right.
But I can remember when at the Democrat National Convention for Roosevelt's 4th term, the big activity in the convention. It was one of the real conventions of our American history. It was great because everyone knew that Roosevelt wasn't going to live.
Mm-hmm.
So the contest became nominating the vice president for Roosevelt in his fourth term.
Right.
And there were many candidates and many well-known Democrats. And that went on for many ballots.
Yeah.
And calling the roll in real old convention style.
Wow.
And I was a kid then in the 7th or 8th grades, and I can remember sitting up. My mother and grandmother had gone to bed, sitting up at night with the radio on and all my papers going through those ballots. And you know, the great state of North Dakota cast its 3 votes for, and it went on all night long. And I can remember how great that was. Truman, obviously, it was the final surprising nominee after all these. There were 7 or 8 very distinguished Democrats.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very cool.
And at the time, although I knew nothing about Indiana, I can remember being impressed that there were a couple of Indiana people that played a big part in that Democrat convention.
Okay, sure.
But I've always been sort of really interested in
that's great.
Political life.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Moving on. Were you part of any clubs or organizations in college or in high school or?
Yeah.
Okay. Which ones?
In high school, I again, because of interest in politics, the guy, when I was a senior in high school, I said to myself and to a couple of wonderful teachers who supported me, we're not teaching anything about government. What we ought to do is we ought to have political parties, and we ought to have people run in this junior class.
Yeah, okay,
you know,
sure.
They're just coming along.
Yeah.
So my neighbor was a guy named Dave Beekman, and he was a junior. And another great guy in that class was a guy named Bill Pryor, and he was son of the superintendent of schools.
Okay.
And they were both good guys.
Yeah.
So I convinced our faculty, 3 or 4 of the people in government, I convinced those 2 guys to run. And we had 2 political parties, and I convinced Leo Shea, who was an alderman, to take me to the mayor. And he convinced the mayor, and the city got the voting machines out. As I said, you ought to teach high school kids how to use these voting machines.
Right.
So in high school, we had 2 political parties, and we put the voting machines out, and they had rallies, and we had conventions, and we had a great time.
Wow, that's amazing.
And they ran the election, and my neighbor won and beat the superintendent's kid. Superintendent's kid went on to Princeton.
Oh,
and,
okay.
Dave Beekman went on to Colgate.
Okay, wow.
But it was interesting. Again, I think from my grandmother.
Yeah, that interest.
My grandmother and her sister were always very close. Her sister's husband was mayor of Oneida.
Sure.
They were all Democrats. But,
that is very interesting.
So I've always had a great respect for the Democrat Party as well as my Republican Party.
Sure, sure.
In fact, I've always thought Democrats are a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And in Indiana politics.
Mm-hmm.
I've had many very, very close and admired Democrat friends.
Yeah.
When John Hillenbrand ran against Bob Orr,
Mm-hmm.
John, his wife, and Margaret and I have traveled around. John bought a company out in New Mexico.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That for one of his kids it was going to operate. You know, the Hillenbrands are big in Batesville,
Right.
and had, but we flew out together to that plant. He wanted me to walk around and tell him what we thought. We were always, in fact, I think I got president of the manufacturers or something. Well, they were both candidates, and there's a picture somewhere we've got of me sitting and the two of them drinking a toast, and it was. But I chaired the Republican Finance Committee for Bob Orr.
Oh, okay.
Who was a great friend of John's.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we just have always had good friends. Frank O'Bannon, and
Okay, sure.
Frank was a very good friend, and his dad Frank.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the '51 session.
Mm-hmm.
His dad Frank was chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate
Oh,
in the
okay.
'51 session.
Interesting.
So anything I had in the house, he'd take care of over there. But the O'Bannons have just been wonderful.
Yeah.
And close friends. And the first couple that Evan and I had for dinner in the governor's house, I think, were my wife and myself. So his dad, Birch,
Yeah.
and I were good friends. So yeah, there's a lot of, while I've been active in the Republican Party, this bitterness that's around today just turns my stomach.
Yeah. I'm sure it must feel so strange. Yeah.
I'm inclined to have differences politically.
Yeah.
You know, and,
Right. Of course.
but to really be able to have a lemonade afterward.
Yeah.
As good friends.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, in Muncie, Indiana, became interested, and there was a big JC club here.
Oh, okay. Right.
JCs were big, and had over 300 JCs in Muncie. And today I don't think it's even active, but it was a very active organization with political tones, you know. So,
Sure.
but we had some great national speakers over here. We were pretty snoozy.
Yeah. Okay.
And we did elect Hoosier as president of the national JCs.
Okay.
Had a big campaign and big convention. Loved it. And for the first time, put a radio in our trunk in the car. You know.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. That's fun.
It was a great campaign up in Minneapolis, I think it was. But at any rate, we've been active in JC politics, and so a group of friends said, "Why don't you run for the state house?"
Yeah.
And so I did. We won the primary together. There were 2 seats from here, and they've always been Democrat.
Yeah.
But we ran in the year that John Kennedy and Nixon were running.
Okay, wow.
And good Indiana people wouldn't vote for a Catholic.
Right.
So the Republicans did pretty well. And
Mm-hmm.
we took the 2 seats, which had always been Democrat.
Wow.
And
That's
so
amazing.
I went down as a surprising,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
And as I said, we were married on the 19th of November and went down for the organization meeting in December. And as we went to the organization meeting, the holdovers,
Mm-hmm.
which were only 14 of them, I've noticed, we're going to have a meeting for an hour and a half before they were going to invite the rest of us in, and we had
Oh my
72 we had.
Yeah.
So we had by far the biggest number.
Yeah.
So we said, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
So they were going to organize the
Oh my
house.
goodness.
And we had, through friends, I had 4 or 5 friends in the batch of new people that
Mhm.
were down there. Keith Bulin,
Okay.
who was went on to be
Right.
very active.
Yep.
Merrill Moores, who was very active in that session, very much a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I had known in the law business a guy who ended up as our speaker, who had been not a holdover, but had served 1 term before that. So came back, and all the young bucks were for him for speaker, and so we organized, and we didn't take all of the spots, but we sat down, and about 4 or 5 of us that were
Yeah.
sort of the leaders of the new bunch
Yeah.
sat down with the old bunch, and we negotiated the chairmanships, and we took about half of them
Wow.
away from the holdovers.
Yeah.
But we did ask John Coppice, who had served before and was a holdover and had been on the Ways and Means since we had nobody that had been on Ways and Means. John Coppice took that, and I got appointed to that and sort of handled the education parts that I was interested in. And the post-secondary education, not the high school, not the public schools. Well, you could go down through the chairman, various chairmen as I did, and we split them up. We had some wonderful, wonderful people.
Mm-hmm.
The chairman of the Labor Committee, Fisher, George Fisher,
Oh, okay.
was brother of a high school coach here that I knew well.
Yeah.
And George was a guy everybody wanted as chairman of the Labor Committee because he was a big guy,
Yeah.
and very persuasive,
Okay.
looking and
Yeah.
acting, and handled the Labor Committee
Sure.
without any. There wasn't any question about who was boss when
Yeah.
you sat down at the table. Yeah. But there are a lot of memories like that
Yeah.
I can recall. Merrill Moores wanted and took and was the chairman of Judiciary, and in the Senate, well, I should first talk about, as you know better than I, the unique organization of the 50 of the 50, no, the 59, 61, of the 61
Right.
session, a tie in the Senate, 25-25,
Right.
and a big majority, 74
Yep.
in the House, big Republican majority, with a Democrat governor
Mm-hmm.
and a Republican lieutenant governor, back when they used to run
Right.
separately.
Yeah.
So Matt Welch was our wonderful guy, just a super guy,
Yeah.
big man at Vincennes.
Mm-hmm.
Was the governor, and Dick Verstein, also a guy who had become a good friend, was the lieutenant governor. And so you got a Democrat governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, and a House that was a whole bunch of new young guys
Yeah.
in the Republican Party,
Yeah.
and a Senate that was tied 25-25.
Wow. Yeah.
And what a political environment. And
Yeah.
it was a year after the census, so,
Right.
you know, what are you going to do? And I was chairman of the reapportionment committee,
Yeah.
which we were sure we wouldn't do anything in the first session, but we
Mm-hmm.
might have done something in the second
Yeah.
session. But it was a for a guy who loves to eat wheat at the political trough, it was just made for
Yeah.
made for fun.
I bet. I bet. That is very interesting.
Frank O'Bannon, the father of later Governor Frank O'Bannon, and the governor Frank O'Bannon had a brother, Bob O'Bannon,
Okay.
who was a big lobbyist. And Bob O'Bannon at the time was president of the Muncie Chamber. And we roomed together at the hotel during the session. He went down. So here he was, a Democrat again, and I was a Republican from Muncie, but we were hung around together. And he was very well known in the lobbyist bunch. So I ended up being having a lot of fun with the lobbyists during those periods.
Yeah.
And
Seems like it.
knew him well. And with the 72 folks, the Indianapolis newspaper picked me out as the outstanding freshman legislator in that session. I'm trying to think of the guy's name who always rated the legislators, and he wrote for the Indianapolis newspapers. Well-known political writer. I think I'm getting old.
Oh, well, it's hard to remember all those details. It's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
91, maybe that's
Yeah.
it. I had a call this week, interesting, as speaking of age,
Yeah.
I had a call from a guy who was a young man on the budget agency, because in that session, 4 of us were named to the Legislative Advisory Commission, which is now called a budget agency that works between the sessions. And I was one of the appointees to that, and we worked with the budget agency.
Yeah.
And a young guy who worked with us, just out of the blue, after all these years, called about 2 weeks ago and said, I heard you were alive. And he said, I called you to ask, he said, do you think you're the last one alive from that session?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Said, it never dawned on me to think of it that way, but
right, of course.
Thanks for the call. I'm glad you're interested.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But there were a lot of, there was a state senator in that session a Democrat. He was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the state Senate. He later became a federal judge in Marion, in Indianapolis, Southern District of Indiana.
Right.
Oh, I should remember his name, and I don't. You could immediately do it by looking at
Probably figure
the
it
Senate.
out. Yeah.
I don't have the
Right.
list of the senators, but I'm sorry, I can't remember.
No, that's
but
okay.
a very distinguished guy and made a great name for himself. But Merrill Moores was chairman of our Judiciary Committee, and I can recall, in the last 80 hours of the session, we'd sit down in the House and say, this is the next bill we want to get through the Senate. So Merrill would take that over to the chairman of the Finance Committee over in the Senate and say, well, here's the next one. And he'd say, well, here's our next one. And they'd swap those and run them back.
Yeah.
Then we'd get through that, and then we'd say, okay, now what's the next level?
Right. Yep, part of the process.
Yeah. But we had a great time doing that as a bunch of, frankly, younger guys who had never been there before.
Sure, absolutely. So when did you become affiliated with the Republican Party?
Affiliated. Well, I had interest in both parties.
Right. Mention that.
I had interest in politics.
Right.
And politics and government was the interest. It wasn't the party was the main interest. It was government and people expressing themselves in groups.
Yeah.
That was most interested. Now, it happens that there's a Republican and a Democrat Party.
Exactly.
And that may change. And historically, it was different.
Yep.
And it may be different future. But I must admit, because of my Irish Catholic Democrat New York background, that was all Democrat.
Yeah.
And my affiliation was a Democrat. And sort of like my grandmother, Jesus Christ would never be a Republican.
Yeah.
As I matured, I found myself as an economics major in college.
Sure.
I found myself more in touch with principles that were made me align more with the Republican Party. And then, aside from the political life, I got into a fight with the U.S. Chamber. Sitting at I came back when I was running for the legislature. I had left the law practice in Muncie and joined my stepfather, and we bought that company, Ontario company, where he was running at that time.
Yeah.
We bought that company.
Wow.
And after a couple of years of law practice, I joined his company. So when we were in the legislature and thereafter, I was in the company with him.
Right.
He's behind you there, looking at you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And he died, and so I got stuck with that job.
Yeah.
And so would have been in this was 61.
Right.
In 63, he died, and I became president.
Okay.
So I was out of running for office.
Yeah.
And I had a job running Ontario Corporation.
Sure.
But stayed very active. politically, and that's where I became more interested in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting at the desk at Ontario, which was a pretty small company at the time.
Yeah.
And and it wasn't that he left me any big deal, because the company was $800,000 negative net worth.
Oh, okay. Wow.
When I stepped into it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I was sitting there one day and took a phone call, as I often did if nothing else was going on. And it was a guy from the United States Chamber of Commerce. And he called and said our dues were becoming at the end of the year, and he wanted me to renew our dues.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think I'm going to.
Mm-hmm.
And this was maybe a couple of years after that. I'd been in the job for 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And he said, you're not. And I said, no. And I said, I'm on another board here locally, and we've talked about it. And I think I'm going to be pressing them to not pay either. And I said, I'm getting sick of a bunch of guys with watch fobs hanging over their big bellies, sitting in the Pittsburgh Business Club, deciding everything, and little guys getting crapped on. I don't go for that.
Right.
Yeah, and he said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. We'll miss you. So about 2 weeks later, I had another call. It was a guy who said, I'm vice president of a chamber for the Chicago region. I'm just going to happen to be in Muncie, Indiana next week, and I wondered if I could stop. And I said, well, what day are you going to be here? And he said, what day are you free?
Oh, boy.
So anyway, he came down.
Yeah.
And we had a nice chat, and all about that. And he said, well, we're starting a small business council. And it's going to meet 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And we wondered if maybe you'd want to join that. It's going to be about 40 people. We're going to meet in Washington. And the U.S. Chamber wants to have the input from small and medium-sized companies. So I said, sure, I'll go. You call my bluff.
Yeah.
So I went to D.C. and we met in the basement of the Hay Adams Hotel. And I don't know if you're familiar with Washington, but there's a White House, and then the park, and then the Chamber building is right across.
Yeah.
And the other half of that block is the Hay Adams. And we're in the basement of the Hay Adams.
Okay.
So we're 40 people meeting down there. And we met, wants input on this bill, on input on that bill. I said, isn't that the Chamber building next door? And he said, yeah. And I said, you really want to get the small companies invited? I said, I walked in the lobby of that big building one time. I saw the big room where the Chamber board meets. And here we are in the basement of the hotel. You don't have a meeting room over in the Chamber building for... Well, next meeting, we were meeting in the Chamber room. And next thing I knew, that I was president of this group of small people.
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew, I went on the Chamber board.
Oh, my gosh.
And then I became chairman of the United States Chamber.
Wow.
And traveled around the country for a while. But that politics again,
Yeah.
but not Republican
Right,
or Democrat,
right.
but speaking up to
Yeah.
get your voice heard.
Yeah. Fascinating.
So a lot of this kind of stuff comes from them,
Yeah. Wow.
and it's been fun. But the legislature sticks out in my mind as one of the real things because it got me into Indiana politics,
Sure. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
was chairman of the Republican
Wow.
Republican Finance Committee for a decade.
Yeah.
But I don't like people hiding money,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But when I was chairman, we had everybody printed,
Mm-hmm.
and if you gave money,
Oh, okay.
there's the money, and the top meant, you know,
Yeah.
we got 1,000, 10,000, 20, and we
Yeah.
printed their names,
Keeping
and
track.
put them
Yeah.
up there,
Yeah.
and gave that to everybody. And, you know,
Very smart. Yeah.
I'm very much for open.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Definitely.
So we had a series of staying pretty active. I ran both of Dan Coates' Senate,
Mm-hmm.
first Senate campaigns. I was chair.
Wow.
And then when Dick Lugar ran for president, I was his national chairman. Mitch was his chairman. I was the finance chairman nationally.
Very interesting.
And Dick and Dan have both been very close.
Yeah.
Then Bob Orr was governor while I was the finance chairman. Doc Bowen was chairman of the Mutz
Mm-hmm.
deal, and then
Okay.
became HHS chairman, and I took over the Mutz campaign.
Okay.
ran
Yeah.
And then I've always been very active in this congressional district.
Mm-hmm.
And when Dave McIntosh was the congressman from this district, and we had a dinner at his home one night, a bunch of us, and he said he was giving consideration to running for governor.
Wow.
And if he wanted to run wanted our advice about
Mm-hmm.
a group of us. And as we left, he punched my arm and he said, "Come on over for breakfast." Sure, he lived here in Muncie.
Yeah.
So I went over for breakfast with he and Ruthie, and he said, "We are going to run for governor." So I went back to the office, and two Republican elections back,
Mm-hmm.
a young Republican ran against a Democrat, incumbent of many years, and his name was Mike Pence.
Yeah.
He ran a terrible campaign
Oh, okay.
and got trounced. And
Yeah.
so I and wrote a book about
Yeah.
running a campaign.
Yeah.
Now he'd never do that again. Then he got a radio show, and it was very popular
Yeah.
with the radio show. So when McIntosh said, we went over and had breakfast in the morning. He, Ruthie, and I had breakfast together, and he said, "I'm going to have a press conference at noon,
Yeah.
and I'm going to run for governor."
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Good luck, be all for you."
Mm-hmm.
Then I went back to the office, and I called that young guy that we had met and that impressed both Margaret and me.
Yeah.
Named Mike Pence, and I said, "Mike, we were impressed with you when you ran
Right.
the last one, and didn't win. And why don't you announce for Congress about 1 o'clock, because he's going to announce for governor about 11, so you want to get right in there.
Right.
And he said, oh, my wife would just kill me. She remembers that episode.
Sure,
so
sure.
do I. And we wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
And then he called back in half an hour. And he said, we'd been thinking about that. He said, we'd do that if you'd be our chairman.
Okay.
So I said, well, I had to talk with Margaret. And then I said, but I know she'd say yes. So
Right.
it's a deal. If you wanna run, I'd be happy to. So he ran for Congress and got elected, and I chaired his campaign for 10 years.
Wow.
And then twice for governor.
Interesting.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
And,
That's fascinating.
good friend. So we've stayed interested in politics.
Clearly, yes.
The question was politics.
Yeah.
And we stayed interested.
Yeah.
The other channel that I've really, I've had, the good Lord has been good enough to put us in a time when there's change, and we've had some fun because we've been able to make some changes.
Right, right.
That was sure true in the chamber when it became a new chamber for a while.
Sure.
The Reagan-Bush years were very good years, and we were very much a part of the Reagan and Bush administrations and years, and
Interesting.
that was good. So the chamber was good, and the Catholic University got us in touch with all of the cardinals are all on the board of Catholic U, and we had a good relationship with those who were making decisions in the church. And then I had a call one day in Muncie asking if I would have lunch in Indianapolis the next time I was there with 3 or 4 guys, and I did. And they represented the Indiana AAA. And I'd always been a member, but I never knew really much what was going on.
Yeah.
And they asked me if I'd join that board, and I did. And we got a little bit interested in the politics of AAA, which is the largest membership organization in America, second only to the Catholic Church.
Wow. Yeah.
But there are today 52 million AAA members paying an average of almost $100 for memberships.
Wow.
Around the nation. There are 54 million members.
That's huge.
And so Indiana went to the national things, and I got a little bit acquainted there and so on, and ended up going on the board of the national AAA, which has of the 10 largest casualty insurance companies, I think they have full ownership of 3 and part ownership of another couple. And for instance, AAA now insures 36% of the cars in California.
Yeah.
Indiana is not that high. Some states are pretty high, but it's many billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And,
yes, of course.
Bigger than I had ever thought of.
Yeah.
But I went on the board and became chairman of the national AAA.
Oh my gosh.
Which was very interesting because we changed the structure of AAA from, they were trying to amalgamate it all. I got it
Oh,
into
okay.
one group, and we finally have broken all that up and kept it regional. But it was politics again.
Yeah, right.
And so whether it's the chamber with the Reagan and Bush administration, or whether it's been AAA, or whether it was on the floor the night of the convention to pick Harry Truman to run with Roosevelt.
Right.
You know, it's all, or in high school, to set up parties.
Yeah, you've always been connected.
It's all politics.
Yeah.
But healthy. It's relations of people governing themselves, and
it's really neat.
it's fun.
Yeah, very cool. So yeah, we've covered a lot so far. So did you ever think that you would get involved in the state legislature when you first got out of law school? Was that something that you ever imagined?
I went to law school because of my interest
Yeah, okay.
in people expressing their opinions.
Yep.
And you get interested in these things. I do, because I want to change policy.
Right. Sure.
You know,
Of course.
If you said AAA or you said the chamber, the reason I got interested in the politics was to make changes.
Right, of course.
And so if you're living in Muncie, Indiana, I went to the legislature, and as a result, Muncie, Indiana was the first city in Indiana to get rid of the political control of fire and police departments. You know, we passed a bill that set up merit commissions so that the guy on the back of the fire truck, it would become the next chief, and the chief would go back to the back end of the fire truck, depending upon the politics of the mayor.
Yeah.
And we got rid of that, and we passed that in the legislature in this session.
Yeah.
Despite the fact little was done because there was so much division of political parties, with the help of some Democrats from, I got that bill passed, both the House and Senate, and the governor signed it.
Yeah.
And I ended up as the first president of the Merit Commission for Police and Fire. But we did that, and that, you know, so you join the legislature so you can do some of those
of course.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So...
Or you get interested in the political things. So it isn't hiding money.
Right.
It's there's a big state dinner.
Yeah.
They don't do that today.
Yeah.
It's home.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm a great believer. If I put my name on it, everybody that came to the state party.
Right. Yeah, that's really neat.
And we raised lots of money.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's great. Wow.
They don't do it today.
Yeah. So, I guess talking about your family a little bit, when did you get married?
The first chance I had with this gal.
Yeah. And what year was that?
That was I was married in 1960 in November.
Yeah, that's right.
Same month I was elected.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And see,
my wife, I used to fly a lot, rent airplanes out of Muncie.
Oh, okay.
And in renting the airplanes, the pilot, I used a lot of Muncie Aviation.
Yeah.
Always it would say, because I didn't know when we'd get back, you know, you'd go out for a day and maybe it'd be late. He always said, do you mind if I tip the wing down here where my fiancée lives, and she'll know I'm 20 minutes from pick her up and said, fine.
Yeah.
He said, someday we got to meet her. You know, we got to have
Yeah.
a double date or something.
Yeah.
I said, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Well, he was engaged to this gal, and I finally met her, and that's my wife now.
Oh, no.
But I don't fly with him anymore.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be awkward. Yeah.
We did start an airline.
Oh, okay.
I was on a bunch of boards.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Yeah.
There was a bank here in Muncie. Dave Sursa and I. Dave Sursa was the chairman, and his family was the predominant shareholder. But I got to where I owned a pretty big chunk of that bank, and he and I were partners in starting an airline. Both of those planes we owned.
Oh, okay.
So, for instance, when I was chairman of the chamber, I could get from my home in Muncie to my office in D.C. In about an hour and 40 minutes.
Wow.
I'd go out and fly from here to D.C. So many weeks I'd spend 2 days in the office in D.C.
Interesting.
But you could fly in and out when you wanted to. And,
very convenient. Huh.
The one closest to me here was a jet that we had more hours on that model of airplane than any other in that model of airplane, with one exception. And the one exception was a guy that just took bank clearings every night.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that was the only plane that had more hours on it than ours.
Wow. Interesting. And see, do you have any children?
We have, yes, 5.
5
so far.
So far, yeah. And what are their names?
Their names are Lynn, Mark, Paul, Susan, Victor.
Okay. Interesting.
We had 5 and 7 years. We have a daughter who had 5 and 7 years.
Wow. Nice, okay. And how did your family influence your career?
My family.
Yeah.
Well, my grandmother.
Well, or like your children and your wife?
Oh, my wife is tremendous. You just a most wonderful partner in the world. There was no way that I could have had anywhere near the fun I've had without Margaret.
Yeah.
And she is revered among many people who would tell me to go to hell, but I love her. She is much more popular and much more respected than I am in all these circles. They all want to.
Yeah.
If I go in a room, everybody would say, "Oh, where's Margaret?"
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, she's a wonderful gal.
That's great.
Good lemonade too.
It is, yeah. Very good lemonade. That's right. Let's see. So when you first got involved in politics as a legislator, what were the key issues that you focused on or fought for?
I probably had. I was interested in cities and towns. Served as ranking member in that committee and got my bill through because I was from Muncie, Indiana, and there were things in Muncie, Indiana I wanted to change. And one of them was the whole police and fire thing, which was so political, the people becoming chief without any
makes sense.
Any sense at all. So, I was interested in I always said that because all of the political power in the construction and business was from south of 40, that there was only one patch of southern Indiana that wasn't paved. That the rest of that was all concrete and tarmac down there, and we didn't have any paving up there in this part of the state.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of an overreaction to my desire to see Muncie get connected. Two or three issues that we were pursuing in the state at the time was the planning was being done for I-69, and we did get I-69 moved over this way. It was originally it was plotted for way over the other side of Anderson and up, but we got it moved over, so at least it came between Muncie and Anderson.
Okay, sure.
Another one was the medical school. The IU Medical School was the biggest medical school by far in the country. And we wanted to get that done, and that was a little bit later than this session, but was part of my desire and things I found out in this session and that we pursued. But the chairman of the IU Med School, who later became president of Purdue, and I chaired the plan to put the original plan to put 8 schools of medicine really began with you'd have residencies in these places.
Okay.
And then we got the 4th year of med school in these places. And now, 3 of them, we've got full 4 years of med school, as we do here in Muncie now. It's part of IU Med School.
Okay.
But we have all 4 years as well as a good residency program.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
There's just a series of those, and so it seemed.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Had things and it was fortunate for me that we really got whipped in the running for re-election.
Right.
The whole state went the other way.
Yeah.
Big.
Yeah.
And it was fortunate for me because my stepfather died, and I got that the company that we had, and there were 4 of us who were directors. The other 3 were older and more experienced in that business than I was. But when he died, we were indebted to a large supplier for about $800,000, and they thought that I would be the best guy to work that out. Really. So I got the job with their support.
Yeah.
And fortunately did get that worked out.
Okay.
But prevented, even if I had interest for any actual office holding, but sure stayed interested in raising money and in supporting candidates.
Okay. So when you first started running for the General Assembly, did you have a particular campaign strategy at all? Or?
Yeah, the campaign was, to make the state more fiscally responsible.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Everything that people wanted. And when you run from Muncie, you want to make sure that in those days, Ball State University was a building that the Ball family
Mm-hmm.
gave to Muncie. It was one building with some classrooms, and it was called a normal school,
Mm-hmm.
which meant a teacher's school.
Right.
And it was an offspring of Indiana State University. And the board in Indiana State ran this. And then it became a board that ran both of them, called the State Teachers College Board,
Okay.
and ran both of them. Then we got them split.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was separate from that.
Right. Yeah.
And so in this session and in the 3 or 4 sessions of the early 60s, it became, Ball State University became, first became very independent from the State Teachers Board, then changed the name from the Teachers College to the Ball State University.
Okay.
Then it had its own board, and then I think in maybe the session, might have been 2 sessions, when it became Ball State University instead of Ball State Teachers College. Started getting its own.
Yeah. Okay.
But it originally was part of it. Was part of the board that this gift became part of what was Indiana State University.
Right.
Or Indiana.
Sure.
Yeah, Indiana State University.
Okay. Interesting.
So each sessions we've been
Right.
politically pushing for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, it's a Ball State could run rings around, frankly.
Yeah.
Got a degree from both of them.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd say that
Right.
they've had better leadership. Politically, the leadership, particularly John Worthen, the leadership of Ball State contributed greatly to its growth, strength, and independence by its position between Indiana University and Purdue. I suppose there are people who might object to this, but from my observation of years of watching the academic institutions, when Purdue took the chairman of the IU Med School as its president, there was contention on the board. Several board members resigned, and there was not the close affiliation between IU and Purdue that had happened when Herman Wells and Fred Hovde were running the system.
Right.
In the session that we're talking about my serving, I can remember at the Ways and Means Committee that the 4 presidents came into the hearing, Herman Wells, Fred Hovde, John Emmons, and the distinguished white-haired guy from Terre Haute, all came in, and we had just 2 lines in the whole state budget for higher education. One was the academic, and one was the county agents you had to deal with at the same time, because Herman Wells controlled the budget for the colleges,
Okay.
and Purdue controlled the colleges, or the budget for the county agents.
Okay.
Because Purdue's political base was every county in Indiana has a county agent for farming,
Right.
and that was their political base. Because
Okay.
every county agent is strong in the politics of their own county. So they'd walk in 4 strong, and then they'd walk out, and then they'd go to another room, and Herman Wells would tell the people at Terre Haute and Muncie what they were going to get. And that was the extent. And as I watched in the Higher Education Commission for 20 years, that became much more of an astute group of workers and observers to hone down on where that money went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. When you were running your campaign, who was your main opponent?
Opponent?
Yeah.
I don't know that there were candidates,
Okay.
Democrat candidates.
Yeah.
There were Republican candidates for the legislature.
Right.
But the opponent was John F. Kennedy. I mean, there's no question about that election was not an election between me and a Republican or Democrat running for the legislature.
Yeah.
That election turned on the fact that a Catholic was running for.
Yeah.
And they elected a Catholic.
Yeah, that's right.
From I suppose a Republican and Catholic had never been elected. I suppose. From
Interesting. Who were your national political heroes or state heroes at the time?
Well, I was a close friend of Dick Rustine.
Okay.
Dick Rustine was lieutenant governor. Matt Welch was a good friend.
Yeah.
My neighbor here in Muncie was a candidate for United States Senate in the Democrat Party against Vance Hartke when he was first running, and Matt was from my neighbor. I got to know Matt pretty well, and so at his funeral, Matt and I sat together.
Yeah. Okay.
So Matt was the Democrat governor at the time, and we were good friends.
Mm-hmm.
Dick Rustine was at that time was close friend.
Mm-hmm.
He and his wife and Margaret and I spent time together, and he got beaten the next time round, and fortunate for me because I took the job. My father died and so on, but Dick Rustine called me, and I was on the Employment Security Board, and he got me on the board of Meridian Insurance, and I've been a lot of corporate boards.
Yeah.
And that was obviously because of personal. I should put it this way: the blessing I have had in hanging around the political arena has meant so much in opportunities that people have called and offered.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it. It really is amazing.
One example, Dick Rustine called and got me on Meridian Insurance Board, which I enjoyed very much. There are two insurance companies. Doc Bowen, when he went to HHS, I took his spot on the casting company in Warsaw, big company. Just enjoyed that, just because association with Doc.
Yeah.
When Marble Hill, the power plant that Indiana that was being built here in Indiana under the Orr Mutz administration. That power plant was scheduled to be built for $2,800,000,000, and when it got to $4 billion, and because it was still being constructed, and there was an occurrence in Pennsylvania, if you remember, where a power plant blew up.
Right.
When that happened, our Marble Hill plant was then subject to all of the new regulations that came after the explosion in Pennsylvania. So it looked like it was going to cost another $3 or $4 billion, and Governor Orr and Lieutenant Governor Mutz said, "Stop it," and put 2 or 3 of us on the board of the Indianapolis or the Indiana Public Service Company.
Yeah.
IPA, and so we ran that company and had the real difficult, to me, challenge there of taking the chairman, who I respected so much and had known so long, and taking him to lunch and telling him that his services were not going to be needed anymore.
Yeah.
And that just bothered me terribly. But that's all because of political, not because of politics, because of friendships and respected associations that have been made.
Yeah.
So we were called upon to run that, and then later I had to chair the committee to clean up Marble Hill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still not cleaned up.
Yeah. So what did it feel like the first election day? How did you feel?
Feel wonderful.
Yeah?
Why, when you look at those precincts coming in one by one, you've got all your notes.
Right.
You have the history of how those precincts have been in the past, and look at how it's going now, and you think, wonderful.
Yeah.
And then there are other days when, if you live in the political world, that you read how they're going, and then you see, uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what were you thinking when you walked into the State House the first day?
The thing I remember about the first exposure is we went down to the organization meeting, and we went down the night before because the organization meeting was going to be in the morning, and Margaret and I went down. We had a room in the old Claypool Hotel, and I would stay over and go to the meeting the next morning. And there, and Margaret was a teacher, and there in the lobby was the president of the Indiana State Teachers Association, who I had heard of, but I didn't know him. But he came over and said, "Van, how are you?" As if he had known me for 14 years. And he said, "And Margaret, we were talking with the principal at your school today about what a wonderful job you've been doing at the school." And we thought, we didn't know if you had something tonight or not, but we have a suite upstairs in the hotel, and we're having dinner delivered up there, and we were hoping you'd be able to join us for dinner up there.
Wow.
And that was my first night in the big city.
Man, that's great.
Boy, I've been elected. And
Yeah.
look at this.
Yeah, things are going well.
That was the Indiana State Teachers Association,
Yeah, okay.
who probably were not as happy with me as the years went by.
Yeah. So what were your expectations for the legislative process? Was it more or less complicated than you thought?
I suppose that maybe more than some, I was aware of the degree to which personalities and relationships have in politics than most.
Right.
I would suspect that just because I really had admired and watched and studied political processes.
Right, of course.
So, but I think even with that, I became more impressed with how personalities really are controlled.
Sure.
I mean, Birchby was a Democrat. Ran the House before we were there, ran the Democrats while we were there, ran the House again after we were there. Matt Welch was the governor. But I think anybody that had been around the block a few times knew where to go for answers.
Right. Sure, makes sense. So how did you learn the ins and outs of state politics?
I got them by, it's a process you get by turning blisters into calluses.
Yeah.
So you learn, and the blisters finally heal, and you got good strong skin.
Right. Get used to it, yeah.
But you probably get those blisters on the way.
Yeah. Makes sense. So how did you know the needs and wants of your constituents, and how did you interact with them on a regular basis?
I don't know that you ever know them.
Yeah.
I think that candidates can take polls and take surveys and so on, but good candidates have two buckets. One bucket is what you perceive to be the issues of the moment among your constituents, and you talk about those at coffees or dinners or at luncheons. The other is the real nuts and bolts issue that you have with the president of the biggest employer in town. The road construction company that's not been paid. Or the location of the next highway that's going through your county. Those things that are that issues people want to hear when you're talking in public.
Right.
And then you've got the third set,
Mm-hmm.
and those are issues that aren't open in public, but they're
Mm-hmm.
the big dudes in your area
Right.
have them, and
Yeah.
the president of the biggest company in your district has got a real problem with some form of government.
Mm-hmm.
Or you've got a big hog farm and they're having trouble with the creek that runs through there
Right.
and is dumping something in the
Yeah.
next 3 farms, and
Yeah.
it's those issues that are key to an individual or a group, but quiet issues. So there are big public ones, and then group things, and then kind of quiet issues.
Sure.
At least in my observation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What was the first bill that you sponsored?
The local one and the one down there that got a lot of attention was the Muncie getting the first merit commission for police and firemen.
Right. Okay.
That was, and we got it passed.
Yeah.
And we got it implemented.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got the governor to sign it. And the police unions and the fire unions were all against it.
Yeah. Could you describe for me what the sort of regular interactions were like between people in the General Assembly, formal and informal?
In those days, more than today, I understand,
Mm-hmm.
the formal session
Right.
would be there. I remember a very prominent Democrat saying to me, "Smith, you've never been in the legislature in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to get over there." But he said, those of us in the minority come late, leave early, and spend a lot of time with the lobbyists.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So that's the informal.
Right.
But the formal part of it is you have to be there, and you have bills that you have to walk through, and
Right.
if you've got a bill, you got 3 readings to go through, and you got to move it, the 3 readings in one house, and then take it to the other house and get a sponsor and get it through, and
Yeah.
then it's they wanted to change it this way, so you've got to change, and you got to bring it back together, and you got to have a concurrence committee to work out the differences, and then you got to have both people approve it after you get the concurrence committee.
Right.
Then you got the thing in that, well, I'll take it on to the governor and see if I can get him to sign it.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
so you got a lot of work to do.
Right.
Frankly, some legislators like to do that, and some don't do it. And that's why you get some people that are not legislators but are interested in a bill.
Right.
And
of
they
course.
follow that all the way through.
Yes. Yeah. What were the interactions like between members of the House and Senate, and were there differences between the House and Senate?
Yes. Oh, yeah. The Senate always has a personal image of being 3 flights above the House.
Mm-hmm.
And pictures the House as a bunch of disorganized kids who are irresponsible.
Yeah.
And the Senate can handle this. And, that really isn't the case.
Right.
The Senate is as Probably more politic than the House,
Mm-hmm.
but in a more sophisticated
Yeah.
way. I don't know that I'd say mature way, but I'd say sophisticated.
Right.
And half of that sophistication is only because they believe it.
Yeah. Fair enough. Could you walk me through the process that you had to go through for generating a bill?
Oh, yeah. Well, in my experience, you want to make sure that your bill is written correctly, so you
Yeah.
use the talents of the legislative agencies that are available to make sure that you've got a bill that the lawyers and the agency don't see anything wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you start that bill through it. You introduce the bill, and the speaker, if you introduce it in the House like I did, the speaker can send it to
Mm-hmm.
Oshkosh,
Yeah.
and you'll never see it again.
Yeah.
Or he can send it to if you want to ask him to do that,
Right.
you can send him to the Cities and Towns Committee, where you are the ranking member, because you want to carry it through that committee, and you want to make sure before you bring it up in the committee that you get enough votes to
Right.
get it, and so on. So you got to work with the speaker to see where your bill is going. He could put it in his pocket and leave it there.
Yeah.
Never see it again. That's the end of your bill. Or he could give it to a committee, and the committees have to work it out to bring it to the floor.
Yeah.
So you go through the committee and bring it to the floor. And so I had my bill,
Mm-hmm.
I went to the speaker, asked him to give it to the committee where I was serving, had ranking member, and I got everybody's concurrence before we even brought it up. When I brought it up, took 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
And it comes back, and you got first reading, and you got second reading, and you got to go through all the stuff to get it through the House.
Right.
And then, wow, now you got half the legislature is gone by the time you got that, and you got to get it through early, because if you don't get it through early, then you're out of luck.
Mm-hmm.
So then you get it over to the Senate, and you got to find somebody, and I sure knew the Senate was fit 25-25. So I wanted somebody on both. So I had Dick Verstein, who ran the Senate,
Right.
and Frank O'Bannon, who was a Democrat,
Mm-hmm.
elder statesman. And you want them to make sure they're smiling when you come over with your bill.
Yeah.
And you've got to get it to a committee where you can make sure you can get it out, in and out.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
you get it in and out, and get your vote, and bring it back.
Yeah.
And that you're then feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, if what happened in the Senate, if somebody changes it, as they did, and they usually do,
Mm-hmm.
and then you got the one from the House and the one from the Senate, and you got to work out the changes in a way that the other place agrees.
Sure.
And then when you get it down, you got a final vote, and then you got to go to the governor's office, and you got to get the governor to pass it.
Right.
It is not easily done.
Sure. Yeah. It's a complex process.
Yeah, it is. It's a complex process, properly so.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want a bunch of mishmash.
Right. Of course. No. Yeah. You don't. Yeah. It causes other problems.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. It isn't complicated in a clumsy way.
Right.
It is. It's complicated to assure it's safe.
Right. Right. And when people were voting on legislation, did you have an idea of how people were going to vote before they voted?
Well, you'd like to.
Yeah.
You want to have.
Right.
And if you if you're down to bringing up a bill in a committee or in one of the houses and you don't know what the vote is, you're not a very good legislator.
Yeah. Yeah. How important would you say it was in the General Assembly to work with the other party?
Well, in my view,
Yeah.
essential.
Yeah.
In some people's views, idiotic.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very much, if you can avoid outright conflict by a major group
Mhm.
that are going to affect your outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Logic tells you how to do that.
Yeah.
But frankly, I just enjoy that more.
Sure. Would you say that the interactions between Democrats and Republicans, generally speaking, were pretty good and friendly?
Oh, they were fine.
Yeah.
Sure. I hung around with
Yeah.
Democrats socially after.
Yeah. Right.
Bob Rock, who became Democrat
Mhm.
governor later. Bob and I are very good friends.
Yeah.
From Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
We were, at the O'Bannons. It was just, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. What would you say the public does not know about the General Assembly and how it operates?
People that I find that difficult to answer because
Mhm.
I think there are very different perceptions
Right.
by different people. I
Sure.
think it would be tough to judge this is
Mhm.
the perception.
Right.
There are people that don't understand it that would say something like, oh, you got a bunch of hacks down there that,
Mhm.
that are completely don't understand
Mm-hmm.
the process. But I think most people who really seriously are familiar with the process of government
Right.
generally can find disappointments here and there,
Mm-hmm.
but the process is tough to replace.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better
Mhm.
solution
Right.
for our company, our country, excuse me,
Yeah.
our country. I can't think of a better solution than the federal government and the state governments we have.
Mm-hmm.
I am hesitant, for instance, I hear people talking about we ought to give up the electoral college.
Mm-hmm.
But I always say, remember, historically, we are the United States
Mm-hmm.
of America. The
Right.
United States. We have a group of states who decided to do this together.
Mm-hmm.
And so and those states are important. They're different. but we have an amalgamation of 50 different states together, and somebody wants to take over all states and be like mine, so California wants all 50 states to be like California. Or, I heard someone saying this morning, a lot of people are moving from California to Texas, and they're going to turn Texas blue. That isn't right. People are moving from California to Texas because they don't like what they saw in California.
Right.
And they aren't blue voters. They're going to be red voters in Texas.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to get out of that. And here I'm going to...
Right.
And the states are different.
Sure.
Wyoming is a heck of a lot different than Vermont. And
yeah, that's a fair analysis.
And that's all part of this governing, and I have great respect for what we've developed and the way it operates. And
yeah. So do you think that there should be more people that are more aware of government and how it works?
Absolutely. Their life depends upon it.
Yeah. Let's see. What would you say was the most controversial issue during your time in the General Assembly?
Well, I can tell you, the one that got the most letters was Johnson grass. How to control Johnson grass.
That's interesting.
Was the #1 issue for letters to the House of Representatives.
Wow.
I think I recall that. The control of Johnson grass.
That is interesting.
You'd be surprised that if you judge the mail that you get and so on. Often surprising.
Yeah. Well, what piece of legislation was hardest that you were involved in?
Hardest. I don't know that I know what that means.
I guess which one was like the most complex piece of legislation, required the most work on it to get it the way you wanted, perhaps, or...
Well, the most innocuous can be hard. It can be difficult.
Yeah.
Maybe difficult is the word. Every piece of legislation is difficult. Got to be planned right, as we were talking.
Yeah.
I think maybe the most emotional ones are the ones that get you.
Right. Well,
back in the days that I was there, I think probably the most emotional issues were getting to be school finance. I think was very emotional.
Yeah.
It is not understood well.
Yeah.
It involves so many people with students, so many teachers. It's got a well-organized lobby, both for and against.
Yeah.
It's a major part of the budget. It has to do with state tax, and it has a lot to do with local tax. It has pride, from academic scholarships to basketball teams. So I would suspect that I would, giving it enough time, would probably think the most emotional deals that the legislature has one of them is school financing.
Yeah. Yeah. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
To get elected.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. Good answer. What about the biggest hurdle you had to overcome during your time as a legislator?
Personal or?
Sure.
Personal, it was getting married on the 19th of November
Yeah.
and then starting the session right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
And the first few weeks of first 2 or 3 months of marriage,
Yeah.
it was with my wife teaching in Muncie and my being in the legislature.
Yeah. What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, the General Assembly has the responsibility and authority to give the support and the tools to state government. And state government in Indiana has control over so many functions
Right.
of life. If you has the function and responsibility of staying out of the way in some areas,
Yeah.
religion,
Mm-hmm.
of being a welcome partner, if indeed there is a vigorous private school
Right.
environment, whether that's higher education or post-secondary or secondary or
Sure.
grammar. It sets the tone, I think, for relationships.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between I'm proud to be a Hoosier, and Indiana has more manufacturing per citizen than any state in the Union. And Indiana sells more ducks than any state in the Union. And all those, many facts.
Right.
Hoosiers play basketball well.
Yeah.
And there are so many things that you can have a sense of pride and if you make Indiana more than a basketball team, but make it a real sense of pride.
Yeah.
And pride that you want to make it work well,
Right.
like a child or an ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be proud of it. You
Yeah.
want to talk up the points where it's great, and maybe you overlook the warts.
Yeah.
And be happy about being a Hoosier.
Right. Right.
And
of course.
if you're happy about it, we'll find a way to work out the problems. And it might take a legislature, or it might take a Super Bowl, or
Yeah.
might take other things. But we can be happy as Hoosiers. You don't have to,
Right.
be sad and
Yeah.
upset. And
Sure. So, how would you summarize your time as a legislator?
summarize my
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I was a neophyte.
Mm-hmm.
Had good friends. It was a tumultuous environment compared to other years when you consider the Republican House and the tied Senate and the Democrat governor and the Republican lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
It was a world that wasn't steady.
Right.
It was unsteady. So in that environment, perhaps it was more exciting than it might have been in a sleepy
Sure. Yeah.
session today.
Yeah. What is your favorite story or anecdote from your time as a legislator?
I think the biggest, I think if I were starting to describe that to someone who knew legislators from another state, I'd say it started out with a big smile when the holdovers from the last session said to the freshmen coming in this year, we're going to have an hour and a half meeting of the holdovers to organize the House.
Yeah.
And we said,
Yeah.
too bad those old guys can't count.
Yeah. That's funny. Oh my goodness.
But that began with a...
Yeah. Yep. What lessons, if any, did you learn as a legislator?
I learn something every day. And I think that there is lots of structure and lots of history and lots of theory about government and so on, but the big thing you can't forget every minute is that it's people.
Yeah.
And that's, it's people.
Yeah. True.
And it isn't, everything is people.
Yep. Pretty much.
I've often said, I've been more of a businessman, but I've always said, you get the challenge, no matter what business you're in, the challenge is to run people, customers, technology, facilities, and money, in that order.
Yeah.
And on the drive to work every day, if you just think I've got 2 or 3 unique things I ought to be doing in each of those areas, and I ought to be ahead of the stream in each of those areas,
Yeah.
you'll be a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any regrets as a legislator?
Oh yeah. I did not get every bill I voted for.
Yeah.
That's one. My general reaction to having served is not one where I would remember regrets. It's one where I sincerely felt blessed to have the opportunity. Really, I gleaned so much from that I hardly could have any regrets.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Win.
Win?
You can't win, you don't have to worry about voting.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's see, down to the last few questions here. How has the state changed over the course of your lifetime?
Indiana has taken a much more of a leadership profile in the country. The typical New York, California flyover, most people in New York would fly to California and not recognize there's anything in between.
Yeah.
And I think the Midwest is more highly appreciated and recognized than it used to be. And I think Indiana has done a better job than any of the near Midwest. Maybe Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana and Ohio, I think, have just increased in sophistication, in stature, compared to all of the other states. Illinois is, there's Chicago, but the city of Chicago image and the state of Illinois have just not been able to keep the image up.
Mm-hmm.
I think Chicago has that image of a great place for young kids or something, but it's losing that as the state becomes so idiotically built on the bad judgments by the legislature. Just
Interesting.
terrible. It's an indication of how important the legislature is.
Yeah.
If you look at Indiana and Ohio, they've done good things. We were tagged somewhat about the difference between Lake County and Indianapolis, southern Indiana. But I think those differences are moderating and not becoming greater. I think
Right.
they're lessening. Northern Indiana has become a part of Indiana. They don't want to be a part of Chicago. They're proud to be part of Northern Indiana, I think. And we're proud to have them.
Yeah.
For a while, they were sort of floating out to be part of Chicago.
Yeah.
The southern part of the state has grown in sophistication.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I'm very proud of Indiana and think we have, as time goes, we have increased our position relative to other states.
Yeah, that's great. How has the Indiana General Assembly changed over time?
The operation of the General Assembly is much more complicated. The sophistication of legislation, not every bill, but many of them, with the conflict between modes of information and government,
Right.
the the complication in financial transactions, the sophistication of the higher education world, have all led to, I think, in many ways, the legislature runs fast and has its tongue out trying to keep up
Right.
with several of those fast-moving major elements of life.
Yeah.
But I have great faith that the process is good.
Good. Okay. Do you think that politics has changed much in Indiana?
Yes, it's there's not deep bipartisan political respect that there once was.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have as much enjoyment today in the legislature as I had before. I don't know that I would have as much fun running for public office as I had before. There is this tendency to really build extreme vitriol positions against personalities rather than have a good discussion of issues.
Yeah. Why do you think that has developed?
It's all because of the damn Democrats.
Yeah.
Oh no! Don't. I don't know, but it saddens me.
Right.
It saddens me because it's a magnification in both parties. It's a magnification of the bitterness of the attractiveness of being bitter and of trying to accomplish something by exercising bitter, and that I'm a staunch Christian, and it just ain't good.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Certainly is not Benedictine.
Yeah. No, definitely not. What, if any, enduring qualities do Hoosiers still have or hold dear?
I think there's a healthy pride that we all share as Hoosiers.
Right.
I think there's a higher degree of patriotism in Indiana than there is in New York or California. I'm just proud to be a Hoosier.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Last question. What do you want Hoosiers to know about their role in relation to the function of the Indiana General Assembly?
I think it is healthy when Hoosiers know what's going on in the General Assembly. What are the issues? I think high school seniors
Mm-hmm.
know a lot less today about government in general.
Mm-hmm.
That may be because there are more of them. More kids in high school. There are probably more kids graduating from high school today, higher percentage than 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But they're certainly not as well prepared. That's sad, because I don't know of any educator that wants it that way.
Right, of course.
And the problem is that it ain't good for them.
Right. Yeah. True.
Personally.
Yeah.
It just is not.
Yeah.
It's not good to have kids unaware.
Right. No.
I feel so sorry for them. I really do.
Yeah.
I wish there was some way I could pray them into ambition and excitement. We can sure grow hogs and grow corn and grow soybeans. I'd love to find out some way to grow ambition.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything that we haven't covered or talked about that you would like to say? Or?
Yeah, I'd like to say I'm impressed by the state historian.
Oh, very kind of you. Thank you. All right. Well,
I'm glad he came from Kansas to Indiana, and I hope he stays.
Thank you. Well, I'm really glad to be here, and thank you so much for being a part of this. This has been great. So
Good.
I can turn off the recording here and